Welcome to the Yoga Therapy Hour podcast with Amy Wheeler. I've had the good fortune to travel the world learning about yoga therapy on a global scale, and I've been able to meet many of the leaders in the field along the way. I want to share with you what I'm learning as I interview our colleagues from around the world. My hope is that together we can reduce suffering of all sentient beings through our work as yoga teachers and yoga therapists. Welcome to our podcast today, where we are going to be talking with Jivana Heyman, who is the founder of Accessible Yoga. And I am really happy he agreed to come onto this podcast. After reading his new book, Yoga Revolution, I really feel a deep connection to Jivana and his work and what it is that he wants to bring to the world. I'm going to summarize it here in one of the paragraphs from his new book. Jivana says, I also know that the ultimate purpose of yoga and meditation is to feel love. I can use my time in meditation to examine where I've gotten caught up in the world. It's amazing how confused my ego mind gets, convincing me that love will come from outside of me when I get something or someone accomplished. It's only through the practice that I can remind myself it's safe to be loved instead of constantly trying to get love. Jivana and I both had our mothers die around the same time. So, of course, I could see what was going on with him on social media, and he could see what was going on with me. And in this podcast, we talk about how our mother's deaths have impacted us, especially the love that he felt from his mother. Instead of intellectualizing it or talking about it or any of that, that there just was love. And it almost goes beyond something that can be explained in words. And I find that really interesting, that our yoga practice is to get us to that point, not so that we can spiritually bypass, but quite the opposite, so that we can come forward with our true self, with our whole self. We can come into the world and do great work from this place. Some people might call it the Sacra Cœur, the Sacred Heart, the bleeding heart of Jesus, or maybe the Chitta heart, as some might say. But this place of deep, deep compassion for all that is, this place of knowing that in the end, that silence that's left is the love. Jivana talked about how there's so many different definitions of love, so it's even hard to talk about, but the way that it feels inside of me is almost a stillness or an emptiness, a spaciousness, a feeling of the dropping away of the I, me, mine to be in service of whoever or whatever is in front of me. I've been having some personal struggles this week because one of our animals is going through some terrible medical procedures. And my heart feels completely cracked open thinking about this little guy having to go day after day after day for a month and basically not have a good time. But the flip side of that is that I am wide open. My heart is in that place of deep compassion and empathy. And I actually can see using that feeling to transform how any of us interact in the world. And Jivana talks about this, especially with his husband, Matt, and his children, that it is coming from that depth of suffering even that cracks us open in order to be of service in this world. I think that's what it boils down to. So there was a time when I would really push away these feelings of suffering that I'm having for my little guy. But I think as I mature and as I age, I'm actually welcoming those sensations, not because they're pleasant or I like them, but because they keep me on that thin line of loving so deeply having compassion so deeply and wanting to give completely in service to another. And then here's the final point that we talk about with detachment, not knowing what will happen, not knowing if your husband will still love you after 30 years of marriage, not knowing if your kids will want to be in connection with you, not knowing if your students or your colleagues will appreciate your work or how it will be seen, not even knowing how you're going to handle the next day, right? And all the stress that we all have with COVID-19 and so much of what's going on in the world today. Like, how can we detach from the outcome and stay in that place of the chitta heart, the bodhicitta, right? So that's what you're going to hear about today. It's a wonderful conversation, and let's get to it. Thank you for coming, Jivana. I am really happy that you came at last minute notice, and I think it's perfect timing to highlight what you're doing in the world this fall, which we'll get into in a few minutes. So I just want to start off by kind of giving a background for anyone who might not know who you are. I think you're pretty much a staple in the yoga world, and I'd be surprised if people didn't know you, but you are the founder and director of Accessible Yoga Association, which is an international nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing access to yoga teachings. And you offer conferences, community forums, a podcast, and a popular ambassador program. You're a co-founder of the Accessible Yoga Training School with Amber Carnes, I believe. And you have had one very successful book, Accessible Yoga Poses and Practices for Every Body. And now on November 16th, 2022, your newest book is coming out. And that one is called Yoga Revolution, Building a Practice of Courage and Compassion. So welcome. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thanks for having me. Actually, the book comes out 2021, November.
2021. Oh my gosh, I'm on the wrong year.
No, it's okay.
November 16th, 2021.
I feel like it's funny, with books, it's a long process and it feels like it takes forever. And I'm like, November 2021 always seems so far away. Although now it's like, here we are. So it's kind of funny.
How long have you been writing it?
Oh gosh, I don't know. It's probably 2 years of actual writing and editing. The process, it's quite long with you make a proposal. I mean, you can self-publish, that's a whole different thing. But if you're going to work with a publisher, you make a proposal and then they give you a contract and give you a year to submit the manuscript. And so I submitted, I think it was the end of 2020. And then for the whole next year, you work on editing and then working on marketing. And the editing is exhausting, to be honest, because you have to read through your book that you wrote like probably 6 or 7 times in detail just to make sure that there's no mistakes and that you agree with the edits that they've made. So anyway,
well,
it's a long.
I was lucky enough to get kind of an advanced copy just to prepare for this interview. And I just want to give you my reflections of the book. First of all, you are one of the most skilled writers in the yoga world that I've read. I was shocked. I was like, wow, he can write. And I didn't know if that was your natural gift or if your editor is so fantastic or both.
I think it's me. I mean, I appreciate that. I'm so flattered. I mean, my editor didn't really do much changes at all. I was hoping she would. I actually gave it to her expecting, a lot of feedback. She gave me great feedback, but, a copy editor went through it also and helped me with grammar and stuff like that. But mostly it's me. It's all me, really. So I
was so impressed. To me, it felt like one of those books that the seed had started maybe 20, 30 years ago inside of you, and that the depth and breadth had the time to mature before it came into being. And I feel like there's so many books out there that are just like a very quick book. And this one to me felt like it came from a place deep inside of you.
Well, I You're very astute, because I would say for sure this book feels so much a part of me. Like I agree with that. I really, these are ideas and teachings that I've been working on for forever. And I've been writing about them quite a bit in articles over the years, but and some of that came into this book. There were some articles that I'd written that I used here or adapted for the book, but yeah, it wasn't, even though I've been writing for about 2 years, it was definitely a long process. My first book, I really focused on more of the asana hatha yoga practice and wanting to make that accessible. And I kind of saved all of this for later. And I kind of knew it was coming. I never knew when, but here it is. And in fact, it's funny because now I keep thinking, what am I going to write next? Because I love writing, but I feel like I put it all into this book. Like pretty much everything I think and feel about yoga is in there.
So. Well, and I mean, you don't have to write. You're a great writer, but I mean, if you ended here, you would end on a high note. And I want to quote page 16 in the book, because this is what surprised me when I started reading your book. You write, one of the biggest misunderstandings that I've faced over the course of my teaching career is the idea that I'm trying to make yoga accessible by adapting or modifying the practices. That has never been my goal. I'm not interested in changing yoga into something else. What I've tried to do is to excavate the truth of the teachings and find the truths that are already universal, meaning that they apply to all of us, no matter what our ability or background. And that was the exact experience I had when I opened your book, because in my mind, all the pictures that we put out there in terms of our marketing are of people modifying postures because that's what looks good in a picture. And your first book had some of that in that, right? So I was actually kind of shocked when I opened this book and saw just how different it was. So do you want to talk about that a little bit, how you may have been misunderstood and how you'd like to clear that up?
Yeah, thanks. That also is a great observation. I would say even accessible yoga, it's not about adapting the practice, even though that's what people think it is. And I even talk about it as adapting the practice sometimes, but it's really not. And to me, it's accessible yoga. And then more so in this book, Yoga Revolution, it's really about, like I said in that quote, it's about trying to find these universal truths that are there behind the practices, like the reason we're doing them, right? Like the point of them. And to me, those are universals. And I don't think an adapted version is really any different than the original if it gives the same result, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I don't see it as adapted or changed. I see it as getting to the heart of the matter. And that's what I'm really interested in. I'm really interested in understanding why we practice. Myself, I mean, I want to understand for myself, like, why am I doing yoga? Why do I do this practice in particular? What is the benefit of it? And then can I make it more effective for myself and then also for my students by changing it or adapting it to this moment? Like, how will I practice this pose today or this breathing practice today? And so I guess, we are adapting it in a sense, but also I think we're just bringing it to life, right? We're making it useful and contemporary and alive. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's jumping ahead a little bit. We don't have to go there now because I want to save some of these jewels for people just to discover in the book. But there was one point in the book where you had something happen that was very surprising to you, where you went to a medical facility and you're like, wait a minute, I'm a yoga teacher. Yeah. So that's what that reminds me of, is like just being present to what is right here, right now, and kind of function over form. Like, how can I use my yoga practice in these unexpected moments of life?
Exactly. That's what this whole book is about, honestly. It's just, I love that idea, function over form, because I think that the form is constantly changing. In fact, if you think about yoga in general, it's about looking beyond the form, right? It's looking beyond our physical form and connecting with spirit rather than being identified with this physical body, this mind, that are constantly changing. And to me, that overarching theme of yoga, of like connecting with the universal, right? The eternal, also applies to the teachings. I feel like there are these universal, eternal teachings here that we have at our fingertips, and we make them so, I don't know, we kind of belittle them. Is that the word? We make them just too basic sometimes and simplify them without really getting to the essence of them. And I think that's two different things. It's different to dumb it down than to purify and to get to the essence of something. And that's what I'm interested in. I don't want to dumb it down. I don't want to change it, actually. I want to understand the essence of the teachings and respect it. Because that's the other thing I think that's important in this moment with, our understanding of cultural appropriation and really the tradition of yoga and what it's gone through. And I feel like going back to the source text is essential to look at what is this trying to say to us versus what is yoga like in this moment, and where's there a disconnect?
Yeah. I was actually surprised to hear you talk so much in your book about post-lineage yoga, because you have such a strong connection to your lineage and a more traditional way of learning and studying and teaching yoga. And so I was a little like taken back, like, wow, he really is wrestling with that issue of how do we keep the purity, the essence, the trueness of this, but at the same time say maybe that form of tradition or lineage or the guru model isn't the form this can take anymore.
Exactly. I definitely am wrestling with it. I mean, that's the word. I would say the book, to me, that's the part of the book that was the hardest to write about and to share, because my feelings are so divided. I see both sides, and sometimes it's hard to write about something when you see both sides of the story, and so I don't know if it came through in a clear way, but I basically am saying that I do believe in post-lineage yoga. I think we have to find a new way. The guru tradition, there's still gurus there, and I know that there's still these amazing lineages. And I was, like you said, I am part of one, and I am very grateful for that. But there's so many problems with it. It leads to abuse so often. And I know not all the time, but very often. And
well, as you wrote, that it's hard to find a lineage without that.
Yeah, no, I'm waiting to find one. No.
Keep on keeping on.
Yeah.
But I think what I wanted to say about this, because I too belong to a lineage, and there has been problems in the lineage I belong to. But the reason I think it's so incredibly helpful for me, and you go into this in the book too, this idea of having humility and having detachment, that there's something about kind of giving yourself up to something larger than you that shifts what's happening inside of you. And that's not to say we shouldn't have good boundaries or we should accept abuse or any of that.
Right.
But there is something about that humility of saying, hey, I'm just a part of this chain. Yeah. I'm one small piece.
But you know what? I mean, that is, you got right to the core of it. I think that's the potential benefit, right? That I really also love about guru lineages is that idea of I'm just like a vehicle for these ancient teachings to come through. But the problem is that our ego is sneaky. I speak for myself. My ego is sneaky, and it gets attached to the lineage, attached to the guru. And so, like you said, we have to be unattached. And that's easier said than done, because sure, I can be a disciple, but it's very hard to stay in that humility, because we want to say, oh, I have the best guru. I have, he's amazing. Mm-hmm. He's amazing. And then we defend them. And that's what I see. That my struggle in my lineage is really with the other lineage holders. It's not so much with my teacher, but with what happened around him. I mean, he made mistakes too. But I think worse mistakes happened by the people that protected him and continue to protect his legacy, rather than just being honest and realizing. He even said himself, I mean, my teacher was Swami Satchidananda, and he said, I'm not the guru. The guru is the teachings. He said, don't get confused about that. He was very clear about it. And that's what I loved about him. I mean, he was very clear, like the teachings, focus on the teachings. But that's not what we do. It's very hard. We want to focus on the person. And that's where I think we get in trouble, honestly. Right.
I think it's exactly what you said. Somehow your little ego or my little ego feels more important because I have access to this enlightened being, or maybe not so enlightened. And therefore that makes me better than, or higher than, or whatever. We just have to let go of that.
Yeah. And sometimes I think it's done with the best of intentions. I mean, the people I know in our organization, really are lovely, and they really mean well. And I think it's just almost unavoidable. It's kind of like how I see it with my kids. It's like when you're in a role, an intimate relationship like that, you see that being as special, and you protect them. You just can't help it. And so someone who's intimate to you, that you love so dearly, you don't want to see anyone criticize them or say anything bad. And like, that's how I see a lot of parents with their kids, right? Like, you want to protect them and you see the best in them, and that's fine. But in this case, it can cause a lot of problems, right? Especially if there is abuse, because then that is denied and suppressed, and there's a lot of manipulation that happens to keep that lie going. And that's where I think a lot of organizations have gone astray. And so let me just say, like, in the book, what I don't talk about it at length. I mean, we're talking about it here, and I appreciate that. But what I try to say is, like, there's another way. And to me, the other way is community and service. And I think service is like the focus of our work. Like, instead of focusing on the guru, focus on other people. How can you support your community? Whether that's just your immediate family or your friends or your teaching community or whatever that is, like, how can you serve that group? And can we do that with each other? Can we be gurus to each other?
Absolutely. And I really love in the book where you're pointing out that originally probably the yogis were cave yogis, and they were maybe more isolated, seeking personal enlightenment. But your theory in this book is, look, we're not living in caves anymore. And it isn't actually probably appropriate in the modern age to go that route. And here's another viable option, where we can be together, walking each other home, being of service to the world. Do you want to say anything else about that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, I think that the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali in particular are designed for that individual monastic who generally would leave the world. They might participate in the world in a certain way. They might be a wandering monk, and they would be served by the community, actually, which is interesting. There is a community relationship there. But generally speaking, the teachings were that focus on someone who is prioritizing spiritual life. That's it. They divorce themselves from society and from relationships. And I think that's important, because I don't think you see a lot about relationships in the sutras, right? It's like, it's about your relationship with yourself, and not so much about other people. I mean, I think we find those places, like the locks and keys, or, that whatever we find, which I call locks and keys. Some people call it something else, but it's like Book 1, Sutra 33, like disregarding the wicked, compassion.
Maitri, Karuna, Mudito, Upeksha, Punya,
we
Punya.
think of that about other people, but actually, probably that's really for our own thoughts, and for our own mind. I mean, the sutras were really so much for monks. Anyway, I just think we always try to translate it for the community, but I think the teachings really were about individual spiritual practice. And to me, that's very hard to do in general, but also right now, like you said, in this modern world. If you are part of society at all, then you need to be connected in some way. And that compassion is hopefully for others, and for yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, I would just say, I'm a householder, and I feel like my path is different than that of a monk, right? Like, my family is where I learned so many difficult lessons, and I'm grateful for that. But I also see that as yoga. It's no different than any other yoga. And family life or householder life can offer so much, can offer enlightenment, but it looks different, I would say. At least that's my sense.
Especially with 2 kids.
Yes, especially my 2 kids.
and happy anniversary, by the way. I saw that.
Thank you.
You and Matt had an anniversary this week.
Yeah, I know. We've been together an incredibly long time. Thank God for him. But also that relationship with him has been probably my greatest teacher. I mean, the book is dedicated to him, not by mistake. I
saw that.
I'm not just being kind. I'm actually, what I'm saying is, this is dedicated to my husband, who I've been with for 28 years. And it was funny because I actually met him right when I was getting into yoga teacher training. And I literally made a choice. I was thinking about becoming a monk. I haven't really talked about this before, but it was in my mind because the lineage I'm part of has a lot of monks, contemporary ones. And he kind of saved me. I mean, honestly, I think he kind of
beautiful.
He kept me grounded in the world, in a way that, I mean, monkhood is fine for some people, but I don't think that was the right path for me. And I feel so grateful to him and also challenged by him. I mean, we have a great relationship, but it includes daily struggle. You have a partner.
I've always thought about that with you. And it's a little different for me because I don't have two children in the mix. Yeah. But you are it looks like you're on 24/7. You're of service to everyone and everything. I often wonder, how do you have time to have a relationship and raise children? I mean, any thoughts about that?
Yeah. I mean, well, one thought about being on 24/7 is that I have an amazing staff. Accessible yoga is not just me. It's really not me at all. We have an amazing board, including Matt Tiller, who I'm sure you all know, and an amazing staff that just are incredible and do all of that. And sometimes it looks like it's me. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's fine. But I am a busy person and I love to be busy, and it keeps me engaged and excited because I love yoga and I love to share it. But yeah, I mean, I was too busy. Actually, the pandemic helped me to slow down because I was traveling and teaching constantly. I was gone. And Matt was dealing with our kids, and our kids were challenging. And right now they're 16 and 20. And our 20-year-old, he's going to be moving out soon. So that's probably good. But I kind of had left him in the lurch a bit. I left him with the kids a lot when I was out traveling. And now that I'm back, it's been really good for me. It's been good for us to have this time together, for me to kind of settle. Actually, I wouldn't have been able to finish writing that book if I didn't have to be here, just writing and working and teaching.
Were you unaware when you were out and about, or were you aware oh gosh, I'm leaving him with the kids again, but I have to do this. So we'll figure it out when I get home. Because my husband, I didn't even realize how much I had put on him.
Yeah. I guess I did and I didn't. I mean, I kind of did. But see, what happened is, in the early part of our parenting, I was a stay-at-home dad. So he has a regular 9-to-5 job, and I'm a yoga teacher, and yoga teachers don't make a lot of money. And so it was very clear that we needed him to keep working, and I would basically stay home with the kids. And then slowly, as I got older, I taught more and more and more. But I really dedicated, the first, 15 years of parenting just to being there with them and teaching in the evenings or whenever I could. And then once they were kind of old enough, I was out. I was I'm going to go now. It's my turn. And he's still working though, unfortunately. And our kids are challenging. So, I talked about it slightly in the book, but, my daughter has mental health challenges. And so it wasn't parenting, it was parenting a kid with a disability. And that's a whole nother thing. And that's also why I needed a break. I needed to go and teach, and teaching became an outlet for me. And I'm very grateful to him for giving me that time. But, now I'm back. So.
And it's so clear that you have this activist, passionate heart that wants to be out making a difference in the world. So let's talk about that kind of that inner place in you that has something you want to say. I mean, you've started a movement in the yoga world that has gone, I think, beyond accessible yoga. I feel like you started it there, but what you all did there has now permeated Yoga Alliance and C-IAYT and Yoga Service Council. It's almost like you and your organization were the forerunners for everybody else to then come be like, oh yeah, we got to get on that train.
Well, I appreciate that. I want to say though that there were so many people that I look up to that were already doing it too. Like I appreciate you saying that I started a movement, but I just want to say like I could name so many incredible yoga teachers that were doing it already. And I think what I'm good at is I'm good at bringing people together, and I'm good at, like community organizing piece. But like so many teachers, and I think of, Matthew Sanford and Diane Bondi and my friend Amber Carnes, and just so many people who were just already out there doing the work. I have a background in community organizing, and so that really helped. I mean, I spent the early part of my life as an AIDS activist, which it doesn't sound like much. Like when you say that, a lot of the time when you say you're an AIDS activist, okay, well, I don't know if people really get that though.
Okay, well, explain it, because when I hear that, I'm like, holy crap.
Yeah, because AIDS activist means that I was basically doing community organizing. So I spent years and years like learning how to work with other people and to create a movement. And that's what we were trying to do. So I worked with ACT UP, and, we were pretty successful for a while. I mean, and I was on the young side. So I feel like with ACT UP, I wasn't a leader. I was really a follower. I was learning from amazing activists and organizers who taught me how to do this. And so much of that translated directly to accessible yoga. But I am an activist at heart. I think yoga is my passion, but my other passion is, fairness and access and equity. And that's what I'm really interested in. And to me, yoga speaks to that directly. And that's why I love it so much.
And could you even say yoga is the vehicle with which you've chosen to express those passions?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Definitely. Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you, you were doing this AIDS activism really early on, before it was popular. And I'm sure it was a very challenging time. Did that give you kind of like a thick skin to be able to go out and be progressive and spread a message that maybe people weren't understanding or getting, or maybe they were even adversarial towards?
Yeah, I think so. I think part of it is just being gay, actually. Just like I grew up learning that I had to have a thick skin. I mean, I knew I was outside of society in some ways. And that's another thing that I think is hard for people to get. Like being gay right now is very different, at least in the US, than it was, I came out in, I think it was 1984. And it was just like a very different time and place. And, the AIDS epidemic in the context of the homophobia that existed at that time was a very different experience. Like people say, oh, was it like COVID? And it's like, well, yes, if you were dealing with COVID, like in the worst kind of like most hate-filled environment, which we kind of were actually for a while there, but when Trump was president. But I mean, it's hard to think back to those days, but I definitely learned a lot about myself and about how to organize people. And also, yeah, like you said, not to get offended so much by what people are doing. I mean, with AIDS, we're dealing with life and death stuff. With yoga, it was a lot more like a lot lighter. It didn't feel like life or death here. I'm not trying to save someone's life with yoga so much, but I also feel like yoga is life-saving.
Yeah.
It saved my life, honestly.
So I just want to read a little bit more of the book. I wrote down all my favorite quotes. You said, I feel like I've finally reconciled my yoga practice with my activism, and I've found the shared root of both, which is love and compassion. I see that there's no separation between the personal and the political and the practice. Yoga takes the form of service and social justice. So let's go into that now. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I kind of hinted at it earlier when I was thinking about like, how do we replace the guru now? And I think it's with community, but not simply just like community. It means through loving service to others. That's what I think of as community, is like through care. And I see you doing this too, by the way. I just want to shift for a minute and say, like, I see you online and how kind of endlessly positive and supportive you are. Like you're out there teaching people and also kind of cheering them on. Like I see how active you are, at least on social media that way. It's quite amazing. It takes a lot of energy.
Thank you.
To do that. Yeah. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. And I see a few people doing it, but I would say you stand out for sure. And I guess that's what I'm talking about, is like, how do you turn your practice into service by loving the people around you?
That's right.
Yeah.
And that, I guess that was another thing that surprised me in the book. I didn't know how closely aligned you and I actually were, because we don't know each other that well. And of course, I watch most of what you're doing, but the core of this book ends up being, let's love one another and have compassion for one another, and learn how to give each other empathy. And I feel like that's what I want to do too. Not to spiritually bypass or to pretend that problems don't exist or not have the hard conversations. I think we're both willing to do that. But in the end, it ends up being about love and compassion. And I was so thrilled when I saw so much of your book talking about that. So tell us more about that.
Well, I have a story in the book about my mom, when she died. And that's what always comes to mind when I think about love, because I think that was the most powerful story related to love that I shared. And so I can share that story if you
go ahead.
I feel like that kind of just summarizes it for me, which is that I tend to be intellectual. Like, I want to analyze things. And I think you are too, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not really an emotional person. I mean, I'm working on it, but it's like, I care deeply and I'm sensitive, but I'm more in touch with my thinking than my feeling. And so with my mom, it's funny because she was kind of like me too. And when she was dying, like near the end, she got so weak that she could barely speak at all. Like literally for weeks, she was not able to speak. And literally, I'm not kidding when I say all she would say when I was around her, anyone who was around her, was, I love you so much. And it was like she would just have to put all of her energy into that and then kind of fall back asleep. And I was saying in the book that leading up to that, before she got so weak, we knew she was dying. I mean, she had advanced cancer and we knew it was coming, and she wouldn't talk to me about death. And I had, I've dealt with death a lot, like through my AIDS work. I had so many people die around me, and I used to volunteer at an AIDS hospice. And anyway, so I'm used to talking about death and confronting it kind of head on. Like, I'm not afraid. I mean, I am afraid of death, but I'm not afraid to talk about it. Like, death scares me, but it's not like I don't think avoiding it helps.
Yeah.
Personally. So I every time I visited her before she was so sick, I kept thinking, I would kind of hint at it. How are you feeling about it? Like, are you afraid? And she would just change the subject. She would never talk to me about it. And then she started doing this thing, I love you so much each time. And it was just so clear to me that she was just telling me that's the answer. There's no analyzing it. It's not something the mind can understand. Love and death, these are beyond our comprehension. The mind is limited.
Which I think, strangely, that brings us back to the beginning of our conversation. I think that is what is supposed to happen with a guru, although it probably doesn't work anymore. But that feeling of all there is love, and there's no words to even explain.
Yeah, I had that with my teacher. I did, for sure. There's moments that I can't describe that I had with him, and with my mother too. And I think with so many other people in my life, like I focused on him for so long, and then when she died, now it's been about 4 years since she died. That was kind of a wake up call for me too. Like, it's not just my guru, it's my mother and my kids and my husband and the way I feel about them. That's the point. I mean, it's cliche, but that is it. That's what it is. It's love. And I need to be more clear on that, right? I just need to keep focused on that point.
That's right.
And make sure that's prioritized in my actions and in my words as much as possible.
I completely agree. It's so easy to kind of know that, and they'll be there, and I can put them on the bottom of the list, and instead of saying, no, this is my priority in life.
Yeah.
To be, and also with your students and your community. I mean, I think that's what you're saying is we can do this as a community together, as messy as it might become.
Mm-hmm. And actually, another part of this is about loving ourselves.
Yes.
And that's something that I've really struggled with, and I think probably most people struggle with. And I would say that's a lot of what I share in the book. You referred to like an anxiety attack I had that landed me in the hospital. That was a huge lesson for me. But in general, I think I'm hard on myself and I'm my worst critic. And I've tried to, I'm getting older. And so it's like, I'm trying to learn from that. Like, what is the point of that? What am I, what is it that I'm trying to do here? It's one thing to learn from our mistakes. I get that. But it's another thing to be overly critical so that you actually self-sabotage. And I think there was some of that happening for me. So I really tried to embrace failure. And I write about that a bit in the book too. Like, I think failure is something we need to talk about a lot more. I think that the sutras are clear on it. And the Gita as well, even, but in the sutras, it's clear that like pain is there for a reason. And it's not that we need to seek out abuse. We have enough. But,
right.
but we can learn from our suffering. It's not for naught, right? Like the suffering has meaning. And only if we love ourselves, though. You have to love yourself enough to actually learn a lesson from your suffering. Otherwise, you can just repeat it again.
Yeah. Especially when it's unconscious and we're, right. Just doing what we've always done. As you were talking, I was thinking, I could feel, as you were talking about your mother and even your guru, I wondered, is it possible for you to feel that for you? Have you had glimpses of that?
I think so. I was talking with, Michelle Cassandra Johnson. Mm-hmm. I was doing an interview with her, and she's such an amazing teacher, and she talks about ancestors a lot. And I was thinking, that's how I relate to my mother. And in meditation now, I feel her, and she's part of me. So like really, I am feeling it for myself, but it's easy to identify as my guru or as my mother or as my child. I can somehow see them reflected in myself easier than just me. Does that make sense? I don't know.
It does. And I've been working with this too. Our mothers died right around the same time. I remember seeing your posts and my posts, and my mother was a lovely human being, but she was pretty critical. And even now after her death, like I can still hear her criticism. So for me, I have the opposite. Okay. Like I cannot see it through her. I can hear her little voice telling me this is off or that is off.
Okay.
But I have been able to embody it towards myself, within myself. I don't know how, but somehow it's inside of me, my love for me. But it sounds kind of different for you, like you're channeling it through your mom.
That's one way. I think yoga practice itself actually creates that experience. Mm-hmm. If you think about what is the goal of yoga, what are we trying to feel and do? Like, what are we trying to be enlightened and leave gone? No. So like, what is it that we want? And I think this is it, actually. We want to feel love and joy. We call it joy, but actually, I don't think there's much difference there between being in the experience of love and being in the experience of joy. I think they're very much the same. So I would say yoga has taught me, like over the years, by practicing, I can feel that sensation of peace, maybe you'll call it, or stillness, but that's love.
Expansion, maybe.
I think we use the word love. I talk about that in the book too. We use it to mean so many different things, but talking about a universal spiritual love that feels very, expansive and peaceful.
And so how does that for you connect to activism? Because activism oftentimes has kind of a fiery, sometimes judgmental, sometimes right and wrong side of the fence. And yet here you're saying, and we want to hold the essence of this peace or joy or love while we are trying to serve people.
Yeah, I think it's exactly the same. To me, that's what activism is based on personally. It's about love. It's about expressing the love I feel for other people by speaking out in a way that might support them or reduce their suffering. So,
right.
I think our egos get involved. And so sometimes we don't do a good job But I think the goal generally of most social justice movements is sharing love, reducing suffering of others, seeing ourselves in others, which is to see the heart of ourselves in the other person rather than to see them as different. And that's also acknowledging the difference. So I think what I try to explain in the book is what's so beautiful about yoga to me and social justice is that yoga already encompasses these concepts, because yoga says, on the one hand, we are the same, but also our embodied experience is totally different. The body and mind of each of us is totally different, but the essence is the same. And that's the same with activism. It's saying like, we should have the same rights, right? We all deserve to have justice and the pursuit of happiness and freedom, and some sense of say over ourselves. And yet our experiences are totally different. And the ways we are marginalized or the way we are challenged depends so much on our position in society, who we are, the color of our skin, our gender expression, our sexuality, our ability or disability. I mean, it's all very much, it's systematized. So I think what I'm trying to say in the book is like connecting yoga to social justice is that we can connect with the heart of other people and also acknowledge the difference.
And that's exactly what I read and got from it. So your message was heard loud and clear. I think that the difficulty for me, and maybe you can help me get over this, is I have a really hard time trying to explain that to someone who doesn't see their privilege and actually doesn't want to admit that they have any. And so I've kind of in my mind just decided, well, there's a lot of other people to focus on, and that's where I'll just spend my time and energy, because as you and I talked about very early on when we met, it's like banging your head against a wall and you really don't feel like you're getting anywhere. So you just kind of want to stop having those conversations, even though maybe we should continue. It's hard work.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, well, personally, I'm, as a white man, I have a certain amount of privilege that I feel like I need to use in terms of making impact and making change. Like that's my responsibility. I don't think the responsibility lies on marginalized people to make that change, even though we need to let marginalized people be the leaders and tell us what's needed. We all have a role. So I would just say that part of why I wrote the book is because I need to speak out, right? Like even though I think we should all be listening to like South Asian teachers right now in yoga, I still wrote a book because I feel like certain people will listen to me. Like certain people will respond to me that wouldn't respond to somebody else. And so I have a role there. I think that, but to answer your question, I would just say that to me, it goes back to the teaching of non-attachment, and, that I'm sure you know very well. And that's just like, I serve without focusing on the outcome. Now, the thing about service is, you have to put yourself in the mix. So when I serve, it's not at my own detriment. I need to serve in a way that is also respectful to myself and not abusive to myself. So I have to be sure that I care for myself enough so that I am effective in the world. And so if there's a relationship, if I'm arguing with somebody and they're not able to see their privilege and they're unable to see what I'm saying, and it starts to get to me, and I start getting lost in that, then I've gone too far.
Yeah.
And I've become attached and I'm no longer of service, actually. So and then I need to find another way. I need to step back and reflect on, why am I attached? What is causing me pain here? And then try again. And I talk in the book about this, and I talk about this all the time, like the imagery of waves and this idea of yoga practice is turning inward, but also then using that thing you find, whatever you find when you turn inward, to go and act in the world. Like we talked about it already, but then it's like a wave, then you go back again. So it's just like constantly, it's the dance. You constantly go back and forth. So if you find you're challenged by something that happens in the world, step back and think, wait, now, how was I attached? What could I learn from this? Could I do better? Do I need to just ignore it and move on to the next thing? Or could I go back again, and be open to this person? And it's not something someone else can decide for you. It's a very personal thing to decide where your service is and how to focus your energy. I think what you're saying again is just that it's so easy as an activist to get attached to the certain outcome
in a certain time period. I mean, I know that happened for me at C-IAYT when I was trying to push forward some social justice issues. I needed it to happen while I was president. Yeah. And you know what? It didn't happen. We planted seeds, but they didn't really sprout until after I left. And I'm thrilled. But in my mind, and I think this is the ego, if it doesn't happen before I leave, it might not happen. Instead of, look,
also, you don't get the credit. I mean, it's unfortunate.
I don't care about that. So I really thought it might not happen.
I know you don't, but actually that's an important point, because I think that you deserve it. Like, you did a lot of work. I saw what you're doing, and the changes that are happening now were because of what you did. And I think it's good for your ego to not be attached to that outcome, but it'd be normal if it was. Like, that's human nature. It's human nature to want the outcome, to want the praise for our actions. And so I'm sure that I can't guess how it feels for you, but I would think there'd be some tension there. Like you said, like, oh wait, it didn't happen until
I was just thrilled that Alyssa is here. I'm, the new executive director. I'm thrilled we have a DEI team at C-IAYT. I mean, I could not be more joyful, because I actually think it's happening very quickly now. Right. Like, what seemed like it was, it seemed like it was never going to happen, and then boom, boom, boom. And I do have confidence in the current team that they will continue to move in that direction.
Yeah. But I mean, that is the struggle, I think, with activism in general, is that you can't be attached to the results as much as you care, as much as we want it to happen. It's like parenting, for me, like I can't be attached to the result of what my kids end up doing. I can only love them and take care of them to the best of my ability. And it's hard. I think as a parent, especially with teenagers, I know parents of teenagers, we're like struggle, because it's like we want to follow them out into the world and keep protecting them. And it's like, you know what, they're pushing you away for a reason, because they need to be independent of you. So it's like you pour yourself into this person and then they leave. And I feel like that's how everything is. That's life. It's like, the point is the pouring in. The point is the loving. That's actually why we parent, why we serve, right? Is that process is actually, not only is it educational, that's where the enlightenment comes, I would say, right? Like we were saying about the love. The way you connect to love is through service.
But I want to go back to what you just said, that I think so many of us forget or never knew, or the whole point is the pouring in.
Yeah.
And you can pour in beautifully to a child or a spouse or a social justice issue, and it can turn out really badly.
Yeah.
And that's just life.
Yeah. And then we need to find a way to not be down on ourselves either. Like, it's not a failure, or if it is a failure, what can you learn from that? Because like I said before, it's service. The reason service is so powerful and beautiful is that it's yoga in action, it's love in action, and it relies on supreme awareness of our ego, which is the biggest challenge. So to me, karma yoga or seva or service is the ultimate yoga practice, the hardest yoga practice that exists. And to me, it's what I think has been lacking in the yoga community, is an awareness of the power of that practice. And so much of this book is really actually about service. I originally, like, that was going to be the title and the theme, and everything was going to be about service. And I just thought, I wanted to frame it a little different, but I just think that's really the underlying idea, is to look at how do you practice love in action. Yeah.
And so I'm going to pull for those of you who can see the screen, I'm going to pull the cover of the book up. So beautiful. So just tell us, what does yoga revolution mean to you?
Well, it's funny because that goes back to what we started with, which is to say that I don't want to change or adapt yoga. And I'm not trying to revolutionize yoga. I'm saying that yoga is revolutionary. Teachings themselves are completely revolutionary in terms of everything we've talked about today. It's revolutionary in a capitalist, white supremacist world, to be loving, kind, to focus on service and not on what you're going to get. I mean, it's like literally the opposite of what we're trained in the West. So I would say yoga is a revolution. That could have been the title, I guess. Yoga is a revolution. That's what it means to me.
And I think that's so amazing to just say to ourselves, look, all the messages that you're getting from society, from marketing, from advertising, from even your own family may be completely off target for what we as yogis really want to achieve in this life.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, yoga is about learning that you don't get happiness out there, right? That happiness never comes from outside of us. It comes from within. And yet we're trained the opposite way, right? Like,
yeah,
you need to get a certain job, you need to get money, you need to be beautiful, you need to have a certain kind of relationship. That's how you'll be happy. And then it's like, you see people get those things and then they're still not happy. And that's what yoga teaches us. Yoga gives us tools to connect with the happiness that's already inside of us, right? Love.
Yeah.
So I do think it's revolutionary. It's incredible. It's incredible. Yeah.
Just taking a breath and sitting in that idea of love is revolutionary, you know? And it doesn't mean that we're not addressing the tough issues. And in fact, addressing the tough issues that we have on so many levels through love, that's the revolutionary part.
Yeah. And one thing I said in the book is, like, to me, the teachings of yoga give you that inner strength and ability to then be effective in the world. You know?
Yeah.
That's why I talked about like that, the wave constantly going in and out. And even the last section of the book is about building a practice. It's very simple and straightforward. Like, we need to practice. We need to have practice to give us the strength, you know, to be effective in the world.
So with our last few minutes,
yes,
what does your personal practice look like to give you that kind of strength and courage?
I mean, I have a lot of faith. That's what's happened to me. You know, I think through my experiences with death and, you know, over the years, and then recently with my parents, both of my parents have died in the last few years. And I just have a lot of faith, and I try to bring that back into my practice. My practice looks silly these days. I do a lot of dancing around, and I mean, I do asana, and I lift weights, and I try to be strong. Like, I'm really focused on strength right now. Like, I feel like I had done too much on flexibility. Like, it wasn't serving my body, and especially as I get older. So let's say I'm 54. And so I feel like I really need to focus on that, building strength and fortitude. And so I think it's a new shift in my life, and fun, you know, finding a practice that's fun. It changes every day. Yeah. But in the end, it's about faith. It's about connecting with myself, having a moment to just sit with myself and try to connect with love, like we talked about, whether it's for my kids or my mom or my husband, or for anyone who's suffering. I think when I say a prayer for someone else, it actually allows me to experience love. So service, you know, my practice is service, of just trying to share the teachings as much as I can to make them useful and applicable for people, and to be nice to my husband.
I love those little stories you tell in the book about him seeing you water the plants on the front porch, and basically you're spilling water all over, and he's saying, hey, there's water spilling all over, and that you're self-aware enough to watch yourself snapping back and saying, yeah, and I'm actually watering. You're not even watering.
You're not watering. I know. And then you wonder, why am I snapping back? You know, it's so funny. Like, that's what relationships give you, right? Like, to see yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if I was a monk in a cave, I mean, I probably would have learned a lot. I'm sure I would have learned a lot, but I've learned amazing lessons from my family. So I'm very grateful to them.
Well, Jivana, I am so thankful that you spent this hour with me. I hope it will help all of us in the yoga community to approach service from this place of love and compassion. I think this is the message we need to get out there.
Yeah.
And I'm so pleased that your book is coming out November 16th, 2021. And it's already on pre-order on Amazon, right?
Yep, anywhere actually. You can pre-order it from anywhere that you like to get books.
And it's also on your website.
Yes, and actually on my website, jivanaheyman.com, people can, if you pre-order or buy the book, you get access to a bunch of practices. I put some practices from the book. That. Yeah, so that you can, like videos of me teaching the practice that's in the back of the book and leading some of the meditations. Yeah, and I hope that people read it, and I hope that it sparks conversation. I'm so grateful to you for reading it and actually having it spark something. And you
it was big.
Questions.
Okay. When I read this book, I felt so touched. I was like, thank God he wrote this book. Thank God you wrote this book. I mean, I encourage everyone. I'm not just saying this to be nice. Like every single yogi needs to read this book. 100%. And the other thing I want to end with is you have given so much to our yoga community. How can we support you besides buying the book? But are there workshops that you're doing? What is it that we could send some love back to you and support you and your family? How can we do that?
I feel very supported. I feel like, the accessible yoga community is amazing. I feel incredibly grateful to everyone who's connected to me in that way. And
do you have workshops coming up? Do you have trainings?
I run the accessible yoga training a few times a year online now. So I don't travel. I don't leave my family anymore.
Good.
Which is good. And I'm not sure when this comes out because I have one just starting September 13th. So it might be closed. Okay. But I'll do it again in January. So people can join me there. It's 35-hour training for yoga teachers mostly to learn how to make their classes accessible. And then, the nonprofit Accessible Yoga Association, we have our big annual conference, October 14th through 17th. So people can join us there. And yeah, I have, on my website, I have lots of stuff. I teach, I don't know what I do, but it's fun. And I love being in community with you. So thank you again. Thanks for having me and for that. That was so sweet of you. Bye.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Yoga Revolution, Building a Practice of Courage and Compassion by Jivana Heyman, November 16th, 2021.
Right.
I've just finished a heartfelt conversation with Jivana Heyman. And there's a couple things that I had on my list that I wanted to talk to him about that I didn't really get to explore fully. So I'm going to use this kind of after the show notes to go into that a tiny bit. And this comes from page 68 of his new book, Yoga Revolution, where he writes, the meaning behind service and community care, it's a revolutionary idea because everything goes against our capitalist training that tells us every man, every woman for himself or herself, and may the best man win. These ideas of individualism are ineffective and painful to ourselves and to the majority of humans. So why do they persist? I think, especially in the times that we're living in now, that's something I really want us to reflect on a lot. This idea of why is it every man or woman for themselves? What makes us want to go there instead of being a part of a community of care? And when I think about that, I really think it boils down to, sounds kind of cliche, but first and second chakra issues of fear and safety and security and wanting to make sure that I survive. I mean, it goes back to the Sankhya idea of ahankara, the I, me, mind complex. And once I take care of me and my family and my loved ones, then I'll see if I have any extra energy, time, money, focus for anybody else. And I just really want to question the wisdom of that. Yoga does not go for that. The Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, Sankhya, all of it is not telling us that this can be about me and mine and I. And it's telling us that when we go inward and connect with that essence within, that we will realize it's really about us. It's about caring for one another, loving one another, having compassion for one another, having empathy for one another. And in fact, that we're all in this together. There's really no escaping this predicament that we're in, right? And that we can actually have some sort of heaven here on earth by letting go of the I, me, mine and allowing ourselves to deeply empathize with one another. And that's not to say that we don't do self-care, that we don't have our daily routines that are going to nourish us, that we need to become a martyr, or that we cause ourselves to be sick by being of service too much to everyone else and not taking care of ourselves. That's not what we're saying. But I think in general, at least in the US, we have a tendency to go the other way, that I'm going to make it all about me. And my practice is to make me feel good. And my practice is to make my body look a certain way. And my practice is to, basically strengthen the ego. So I think many of us could lean in this direction of community care, social justice, wanting the best for all of us, not just me and mine. And that might mean that I sacrifice a little bit in order to help someone else get nourishment, be heard, be seen, be cared for. And I think as yogis, we should be thrilled and happy to do that. We should enjoy that process of giving of ourselves through deep, deep love and compassion and having the other person receive our care. To me, that just seems like the most natural thing in the world that we would want to do. So I guess I'll just end by saying, I hope we can meditate on this. I hope we can work towards being of a community of care towards one another, as Jivana said, and that making that a priority as part of our yoga. So thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, feel free to go on to your favorite podcast platform and give us a review and tell us what you liked. And that really, really helps us to bring this podcast to more people and get more people involved in this yoga revolution. Thank you for listening to the Yoga Therapy Hour with Amy Wheeler podcast. Another nonprofit organization that we like to support through this podcast is the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandram in Chennai, India. They are the source for the teachings of the Optimal State Yoga Therapy School, and we are so grateful. The KYM's Mitra division offers free yoga therapy training to a large number of socially and economically underprivileged children and women in Chennai. Feel free to support them through the link listed below on Red Circle, and we also have details on our website, which is also listed below. And finally, a special thank you to our team here at Optimal State. We are truly a global family. George Mantuan, one of our executive producers. Adam Satchel, senior media producer and sound engineer from the Philippines. Krishna Panchal, a producer from Canada. Modupe Abdullahi, who does the show notes and is an editor for us from Nigeria. And Peter Morley, who wrote and produced the music for this show, who lives in Australia. Find more about Peter's work at www.zenmusic.biz. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.